All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley. So I'm a BCBA at Chicago Pediatric Therapy and Wellness Center, but I actually became a sleep specialist as well last May. So I put together a little presentation about some sleep basics, some easy changes you can make to benefit, the whole family, not only, the client that you may have with us, and then just some fun facts. So let me go ahead and share my presentation. And then we'll get started. Beautiful. Okay. Beautiful. Okay. Perfect. So, sleep basics, some simple strategies to improve outcomes. Okay. See? So, agenda. So, a couple of things we'll be talking about. So, what is sleep? Why it's so important? Some sleep stealers, making changes, right? So, like if you are wanting to take those steps to cleaning up that sleep hygiene, that sleep environment, what order you should make those changes, and just some tips surrounding that. Sleep training checklist, and then questions. Um, for sleep training, we'll talk about a little bit more. However, I think of sleep treatment sort of in two phases. I think of sleep treatment as phase one, where we're really focused on the environment, the bedtime routine, blue light, all that sort of fun stuff. And then we shift over to phase two, which could be the sleep training portion of it. Now, with sleep training, a lot of the times, if we clean up the bedtime routine, get the bedtime just right, and all those sort of things, we don't necessarily have to do official sleep training because the child most likely is already sleeping through the night. But don't get me wrong, if you have to do that, it is one of those things that I suggest maybe you consult myself on. You'll see my email at the end. And then also do some research of your own as well. I have these two books that I highly recommend. Um, Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker. Very scientific look at sleep and why we need it. Um, Very interesting. If you are a scientific reader, this is the one. Now, this one, quick read, it's never too late to sleep train. Kind of gets into those more sleep training methods, which ones, we suggest for, maybe which sort of sleep barrier and whatnot. So, those are two books. I can always link them at the end. Okay. So what is sleep? So we do it for a third of our lives, right? 8 hours plus or minus every day. Um, that sort of historical look on sleep, right? We can't care for our young. We can't hunt, gather, or work. We're susceptible to prey and predators, and we do not build, create, or push humanity forward. What this is getting at is there has got to be a reason why we sleep and why it's so important. Because if there wasn't a true reason, then we most likely, wouldn't need it, or it would evolve over time like a lot of the other human systems, right? So exactly what I was saying. So sleep is not changed or evolved as other mechanisms in our body. And Matthew Walker, who I was just referenced his book, he argues that it could be Mother's Nature's biggest mistake, right? Because we can't do all the things listed above. The other thing about sleep that's so fascinating is discoveries are still being made. So the study of sleep and all of that is fairly new to, the medical field and in the scientific field and all of that. So, new discoveries are coming up every day. So what happens while we sleep? Brain detoxes, some liver detoxes. I'm not going to read through every single one of these, but I bolded the ones that I really wanted them to stand out. So dreams regulate our emotions, memories are stored, sorted, and dumped. So the cool thing sort of about this is that there's this idea that you have to get 8 hours of sleep. But yes, in an ideal world, that would be perfect. However, the other side of it that research is now starting to uncover is that you want to get not only, that certain duration of sleep, but you also want to make sure that you hit upon, each cycle of sleep, because each cycle of sleep brings about different benefits. So dreams regulate our emotions, memories are stored. All of that happens in our REM cycle. And that is why it is very, very important to create that sort of a predictable environment, predictable sleep schedule, so your body kind of knows when to produce sleep and when it's going to wake up, so it can prepare, and it knows how to time out these phases of sleep or cycles. So how sleep works? So no one falls asleep at bedtime and wakes up in the morning. So up here you can kind of see fall asleep. you wake up. This is sort of what everyone thinks happens at night. However, it more so looks like this little diagram at the bottom. So we fall asleep, we go through these deeper phases of sleep, lighter phases of sleep, all the way through the night, right? So, what I really want us to take away from this is that how you fall asleep when you first fall asleep is how you're going to fall asleep throughout the entire night. So, really thinking about the environment, thinking about what your child or maybe yourself needs to fall asleep should be present throughout the night, or we will be getting those sleep dependencies. So, say child falls asleep with a bottle right here. Mom, dad gives them a bottle, they fall asleep with it in its mouth. When we shift into these more conscious phases of sleep, a lot of times we as adults can just put ourselves back down. However, a lot of times with these kids, are not able to do that because we haven't taught that independent sleep. So because of that, they'll wake up researching for that bottle because that is how they fallen asleep at the beginning of the night. So really just thinking about those super small variables, right? It could be door open versus close, right? They fall asleep with the door open and then, mom and dad go to sleep and then they close the door before going to bed. Again, the environment changed a little bit after they fell asleep. And therefore, when they shift into those lighter, more conscious phases of sleep, there's a good chance that they will wake up and therefore you will see more of those midnight awakenings. So, how prevalent are sleep problems? These percentages ratios are so broad because in reality, it is truly hard to tell how many kids have sleep problems, right? A lot of times you'll only hear about sleep problems, if the child's like waking up the parents, or maybe other people in the household, siblings aren't sleeping as well. But with that, it is typical across neurotypical children and also neurodivergent children, right? So you have the 35 to 50% with neurotypical kids, and then children with ASD anywhere from 40 to 80%. So these problems are prevalent across all populations. So everything that we talk about today can be applied to anyone, even myself. I've gone through and, after taking these courses and the certification, everything, I've even changed up some of the ways I've slept. The blue light, which I was very unfortunate to find out about because I love my TV before bed. But, all things to consider. Okay, so sleep needs by age. Jumping into this, you'll see over here on the left by age, right? So 1 to 12 plus. The blue is the time of sleep. The green is the time awake, right? What I really want us to hone in on is the fact that kids and ourselves need a certain amount of hours awake before our bodies can biologically produce sleep. So a lot of the times if you get some of that bedtime resistance and the child's like not falling asleep or maybe they've had the same bedtime since they were 3 and now they're 7, all things to consider that bedtime should be pushed back later as kids age, because a lot of times kids love sleep when we get the right bedtime, right? Our bodies need it. So, something to consider, if your child is sitting here and they're fighting sleep, like let's take a look at, what time they're going to bed, what time they wake up, what time they fall asleep, and see if it falls within this sleep schedule. A couple other things. So, final naps typically drop between 3 and 3.5 years. Um, so drop the nap. We have that earlier bedtime, right? Because a lot of times, these kids still need that sleep. So we're just putting it onto the bedtime. This is great because, parents, you kind of get your evening back. And then also, if you keep the nap, later bedtime. If you have a child that's falling asleep until 4 or 5 p.m., and 8 p.m. bedtime, a lot of times you will see that resistance because, again, their bodies just biologically cannot produce sleep at that point. Bedtimes may become earlier or later depending on naps or daytime sleep. And then once nap drops, bedtimes become later across childhood and into adolescence. So again, thinking about when was the last time I moved my child's bedtime back, is the other big concept to sort of think about here. Okay, perfect. So setting events, some sleep stealers. We'll talk about all of these a little bit more in depth, but just a quick little synopsis. We have like our daytime sleep, right? So if they're napping, some screen time, so blue light viewing within an hour of expected sleep, up and down vestibular motion, running, jumping, crashing, like getting the wiggles out, right? Absence of bedtime routine, sleep signals, talking about that predictability, Late morning wake-ups, inconsistent morning wake-ups, and or missed time bedtime. So jumping back into those wake windows, that diagram that we saw right back here, not creating that predictable bedtime routine is a sleep stealer because bodies don't know when to start to produce melatonin or start to wake their bodies up. Perfect. So screen time, blue light. This was one that hit home because I love my TV right before bed. So I did a little science experiment on myself and I was like, okay, well, what will sleep look like if I read, versus what will my sleep look like if I watch TV? And there was, in fact, a change. So screen time blue light is produced by all LED screens. What it does is it mimics the wavelengths of the sun's rays, which therefore stops that melatonin production. So back in the day, we would only get blue light exposure through either the sun or the fire. And right now we are exposed to it all day long, whether it be the TV or our phones or our computers. Not saying it's a bad thing, but just being cognizant about, maybe when you are exposing yourself to it because it can delay sleep onset for up to 3 hours. What I tell families too, when it comes to blue light is that say, we all love our movie nights regardless. Like I'm not going to sit here and say I've gotten rid of all the blue light before bed because I have not, but making sure that all lights are on in the room before you watch TV, right? So it kind of seems counterintuitive, but it actually filters the blue light a little bit more. So you're not getting that direct exposure. You have some of that, yellow light filtered in as well. So I'll sit there on the couch and I'll be watching my TV, but then I'll have like the lights above on and I'll have my lamps and all of that sort of stuff on. So just something to think about. So up and down vestibular motion. This is a big one, right? So getting the wiggles out, jumping, crashing, all that sort of stuff before bed should be or try to avoid it. It's very alerting to the sensory system. So it's awesome for, school or therapy sessions or whatever else is, it encourages that focus and attention. However, what it does is raises that core temperature when core temperature should be decreasing. In order to fall asleep, our bodies actually need to decrease about 2 to 3% or degrees in preparation for sleep. So couple things to consider here is, maybe is there a replacement that we could teach the child or start to implement in the bedtime routine? So maybe we're, doing the jumping, crashing, wrestling, all of that earlier on in the evening. And then, as time goes on, maybe we resort to puzzles or books or blocks or cars or any of those activities that, don't involve running, jumping, crashing, and all of that sort of fun stuff. Inconsistent schedules. So variable morning wake ups. This is a silent sleep stealer. So essentially the brain just can't predict when to expect sleep and therefore will lead to variable bedtimes and naps. So this is sort of where I tell families to start. Let's start with a consistent morning wake up time, but also a morning wake up time that is feasible for, the families. I don't like to wake up as early as I do on the weekdays, on the weekend. So maybe somewhere meeting in the middle, but really highlighting that the brain needs to be able to predict sleep and when it's going to wake up to make sure that we get through all those needed cycles. Why it matters, right? Often causes night terrors if you're woken up in that REM cycle, and your body doesn't really expect it. It can lead to falling asleep, crashing in non-sleep areas, right? So maybe your child's asleep on the couch, those sort of things. Late morning wake ups will lead to late bedtimes, right? So just shifting around that wake window that we talked about. And then also caregivers may offer bedtime a little too early. This is the other big one again, just if we haven't pushed that bedtime back for, a couple years and we're starting to see that resistance, just something to think about for sure. So sleep dependencies, right? So going way back to that little windy example of how you fall asleep at night is how you fall asleep all night long. It'll build those dependencies, right? So we have some sustainable, right? So if any of these are things that your child needs to fall asleep, These are great. They're self-sustainable. The child can have that special blanket, stuffed animal or doll, thumb sucking or pacifier, right? They wake up in the middle of the night, they just go right back to sucking their thumb and they do not need any assistance from anybody else. Sound that remains the same all night long. Lighting, anything that is easily maintained all night long. That is the biggest thing I'd like to highlight in this whole PowerPoint, is environment should be consistent all night long. Music, music's great. White noise is awesome. But even, if we have some more of our sensitive kiddos, sometimes like thunderstorms and rainforest sounds, that's even too variable. So unsustainable, caregiver lays with child, then leaves, right? So again, the child falls asleep with parents in the room and then therefore seeks them out in the middle of the night when they wake back up. Child is transferred to a new space after the child is asleep or falls asleep with a bottle of milk that, maybe they wake up and they need more milk. So they have to go seek out mom and dad to refill that milk. And then back on the environment, right? So for anything that isn't consistent all night long. If you are falling asleep with your kid, I say it's not that big of a deal. I always say it's one of those things that's not a problem until it's a problem. And maybe you do fall asleep, but then you're in the room with them while they fall asleep, but then they sleep totally fine throughout the rest of the night. All things to consider. So melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone. It's not a sleeping pill or a sedative. This is big because actually we're one of the only countries that you can buy it over the counter. A lot of times you have to have it prescribed to you. And what it does is it just signals the body to begin the sleep process. This is a huge misconception in the sense of melatonin will help, with the quality of sleep or any of that. How I had it explained to me, which I was like, this makes so much sense, was think of it as like a track and field match where everybody's lined up. You have all the bodies or all the systems in your body getting ready to sleep. Melatonin is the gun that shoots that says, okay, everyone, it's time to go. It just essentially signals that, hey, it's time to start the sleep process. Should line up with the person's natural sleep time. So again, going back on that schedule, seeing where they're at and what time they should be falling asleep. You want to make sure that you line it up with that. And then also something else to consider. So research shows that each pill can be between 83 and 498%. Sorry, 83% less or 498% more than what's on the label. So if you do decide to go the melatonin route, I always say like, hey, go talk to your pediatrician, see what they think, and if you're able to get it prescribed. It's also intended for jet lag and short-term use for the most part. It's great for circadian rhythm correction, right? So if you're in a different time zone and your body needs help catching up, great opportunity to use it. However, should only be for short-term use. And then also there's just limited research on it, right? So increased use in 2020. Again, if it's working, it's working. I think it's one of those things that if you ever have questions, like talking to your pediatrician is absolutely the best route to go. But just some food for thought there. So going into making changes now. So now we're sitting here and kind of presented to you some of the facts and everything. And now you're sitting here like, oh, where do I start? Figuring out bedtime is the best, right? So consistent morning wake up is where I suggest that you start. Picking a time and sticking with that so we can start to get in the habit of, allowing the body to know when it's about to wake up or fall asleep. Calculate what time fall asleep time, lights out time should be for the individual learner. Begin the bedtime routine about an hour approximately before sleep will be expected. I'm more than happy to sit down and talk to anybody regarding the bedtime routine and everything because it says 1 hour approximately. For some kids, it could be a 2-hour event. For some kids, it could be, 30 minutes. But it's also one of those things that we don't have to get super tied up into what encompasses the bedtime routine. It could be anything from dinner to a book. It could even include like a video at the beginning of the night, any of those sort of things. It takes about 7 to 10 days to see a shift in the bedtime rhythm. So with that, when I start working with families, I'm like, hey, look, stick to it, I promise. But 7 to 10 days, it takes some time and you'll see days where you're like, wow, this worked great and wow, it didn't. It just comes into like building those expectations and those routines. Um, and that takes time. And then if you do need to make any changes to, um, the bedtime or the wake up time or anything else, trying to do it in small increments. We don't want to be like, okay, well, this child's been falling asleep at 8:30 and all of a sudden now we're going to push it back to 9:30. That's a lot. So if it is feasible for your family to shift around the bedtime routine, just making sure that we do it in like 20 minutes at a time. But then also remembering that it will take about 7 to 10 days to see a shift. So allowing that proper time to make sure that it is consistent. Making changes. So talking a little bit about the bedtime routine. As I was saying, about an hour from the beginning of lights out. Put a little example up here. So it could be like take a bath, put on PJs, brush teeth, read a book, go to bed. Again, it could look a little bit different. It could encompass, maybe their favorite TV show or maybe some music or puzzles or, whatever your kiddo likes, really. This is an awesome opportunity to consult an OT regarding like a sensory diet and maybe some calming activities that will help, calm their sensory system. Some other things, calming and passive activities, including a warm bath if appropriate. So another big misconception is that taking a bath will only heat up your body and therefore make it hard to fall asleep. Actually, the cooling process that your body goes through after the bath actually helps you go to sleep. So sometimes all it takes is move in the bath right before bed, and then the child is able to fall asleep easier. You would want to implement this in about the same order every night. Again, so going back to that predictability, creating that predictable routine that, hey, my body knows that bed is coming because I've taken a bath, and that typically signals it's time to wind down. Again, the start time of the routine will change throughout the lifespan, much as the bedtime does as well. And then avoid screen time and high energy activities during the bedtime routine. Okay, next up, making changes. So, daytime adjustments to consider. So, hey, is my child ready for a nap or are they or ready for a nap? Is my child napping or are they ready to remove the nap altogether? Sorry, that took me a second. It's a Monday after Thanksgiving. Um, so consistent morning wake up time, again, that's where you start. Sensitization to the sleep space. So, has my child spent time, like enjoyable time in the sleep space? Or is this the first time I'm throwing them in and expecting that, hey, this is where you're going to sleep? So, puzzles, books, fun activities, all of that in the bedroom on the bed are great. Just getting them used to, hey, this is my space. It's safe, it's comfortable. All of that are awesome variables as well. Um, so teaching calming play activities or simple one-step task completion to replace jumping, running, and screen time at bedtime. So, we have some kiddos that are very particular in the activities that they like. So if we need to work on, branching out and teaching other play activities, that's by all means something to bring up to your clinician of, hey, like I'm having some difficulties surrounding activities for the bedtime. Is that something that we can work on? Um, Great opportunity to collaborate a little bit. So independent sleep um, can be taught through shaping, fading, and sensitization. Um, Essentially, what this is getting into is that sleep training aspect of it. We really focus on teaching independent sleep. So teaching the child to fall asleep on their own and not be reliant on maybe outside variables that aren't there the entire night. Um, will likely be needed to eliminate middle of the night awakenings, right? So if we're seeing that, a child needs mom and dad to fall asleep at night, most of the time they will probably wake up in the middle of the night and then seek them back out so they can aid in them falling back asleep. And again, this like sleep training or teaching that independent sleep, it can be avoided and it might not even be needed if the other variables have been controlled for, right? So, maybe it's just we implement a different bedtime routine or we look at, what time that child's naturally falling asleep. And we make those changes, right? Eliminating blue light, the jumping, crashing, running before bed, all of those. So this is sort of that last phase as we spoke about before. So sleep cycles, um, this is, we'll touch on this briefly, but this is a little diagram of what sleep looks like throughout the night. So 8 hours, cycle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. REM, cycle 5, right? You can see sort of that duration is not too much, not too much, and then we get, a lot longer in duration. But essentially, all I want us to get from this is that if we are forcing, like I say forcing, but if we're getting the kids up too early and their bodies don't expect it, we're actually pulling them from that REM cycle, right? Because REM is one of those last cycles that we experience before waking up. So if our body can't predict that we're going to be woken up and we're woken up, we're cutting off that REM cycle, which then directly relates to retention, memory consolidation, and learning. So again, just drilling in that consistent morning wake up is so important. Teach independent sleep. So when teaching independent sleep, we can think sustainable and consistent, right? Um, and it can be taught without extinction. Extinction is sort of just a fancy word for what has previously worked for a child in the past will no longer work now. So a lot of times you get that, well, when they wake up, just walk them back to bed. Well, when they wake up, just walk them back to bed, right? Because they're no longer accessing what they were seeking out for prior, which typically the kids are not happy about. And we will see some escalations in some behaviors. So everything that comes with independent sleep and teaching independent sleep, we try to avoid that. Because if that child is dysregulated or irritated right before bed, their body's not going to be calm enough to sleep. So a lot of times when we teach independent sleep, we do it in tiny, tiny little steps to not create this distraught attitude surrounding sleep. So this is sort of what this is getting at. It can be shaped. Parent support can be faded. We can teach new expectations during the day. Same thing with prerequisite skills. So, different calming activities. We can talk about the bedtime through social stories. All of those are great resources. And then that reinforcing value of sleep can be manipulated through that bedtime, right? So, making sure that the child is feeling that sleep pressure prior to putting them into bed. So it's just talking about that value of sleep and how we can kind of change that with the bedtime routine and with the correct sleep schedule and all of that to make sure that when the child is put in bed, they're ready to sleep. Other strategies to support better sleep, one change at a time. So going back, we want to make sure that we're doing this in baby steps to make sure that the child's ready and they're happy about it. And everything should be feasible and manageable for people in the household. A visual schedule, I've done these all the time for bedtime routines, right? To signal, like, hey, look, it's almost time. Like, let's see what's up next. Choices. So, forced choice. So, all this is saying is, hey, like, it's time to go to bed. Do you want mom to sit on the floor or do you want mom to sit at the foot of the bed? So, giving them those choices. Timers, right? So just giving them the heads up when there's going to be that transition. Social stories for changes, just talking about sleep, right? Familiarizing that concept. Calming strategies, calming routine. So there's a difference between calming the sensory system and a calming bedtime routine. And they don't always align. So absolutely consult with your occupational therapist regarding different calming strategies for that child's specific sensory needs. And then the transition hierarchy. So talking about, hey, we don't want to go from here's your most favorite Bluey video you've ever seen to all of a sudden it's time for bed. We're probably going to see some pushback there. So maybe we do the Bluey video up front, right? So we are making sure that we don't have too much blue light exposure. Then we do like maybe the next like preferred, and then we go into dinner and then bath time, and making sure that instead of transitioning from a super highly preferred activity or item right into bedtime, we're bulking it up a little bit and making sure that it doesn't create that correlation of I get my most favorite thing taken away right before bed. Screen dependencies. Use bath time as an opportunity for screens to disappear. Seen a lot of luck with this. Hey, it's time to take a bath. While they're in the bath, let's go ahead and remove this. Um, we get a much clearer picture of what the child's body needs when we clean up the sleep routine and the sleep schedule. So again, We might not even need to do sleep training if we clean this stuff up so we can see. And then over here, he has some different sensory activities for bedtime. See some do's and you see some don'ts. So deep pressure on the joints, the pillow smushes, the pulling, the heavy work, burrito rolls, rocking, swinging, all that sort of fun stuff, right? The no's, running, jumping, bouncing, crashing, wrestling, getting the wiggles out, high impact movement, wrestling with siblings. I feel like I used to do that all the time as a kid right before bed, and it just ramped me up. So all those things as well. And then here's the sleep training checklist. I wouldn't get super concerned with this. I'm happy to consult and meet with anybody who would like more information on this or would like to just further discuss anything sleep related. But does your child wake up at about the same time every morning? If the answer is yes. And we can move on. When bedtime is offered, does your child fall asleep within 5 minutes? Does your child fall asleep every night in their designated sleep space? Can your child tolerate you leaving the room for up to 2 minutes without exhibiting undesired behaviors? Does your child have consistent calming bedtime routine that occurs about the same time every night? So this is saying like if we had answered no to any of these questions, we should go back and look at some of those other variables that we talked about before considering sleep training. These are just some of the different methods that we can use: quiet-based visitation, scheduled visits. So that's like, okay, I'll be right back. Giving, the child a pat on the back, leaving the room for a certain duration of time, and then coming right back in. Okay, I'll be right back. Pat on the back, kiss on the cheek, all that sort of stuff, and then leaving the room again, in hopes that they break that cycle of I fall asleep with mom in the room. That's sort of the idea there. And then quality fading looks like, okay, maybe instead of I'm laying with you in the bed, I'm going to be sitting on the bed. Maybe instead of sitting on the bed, I'm sitting on the floor, and a slowly fading yourself out in hopes that we don't create that sleep dependency. And then eventually you can even get into quiet-based visitations or scheduled visits from there. Thanks for listening. So please reach out with any questions or concerns. I'm happy to meet. I'm happy to talk. I love sleep. And then I've also included my email there at the bottom. So if anyone would like to shoot me an email asking about any questions or want to set up a time to call, I am more than happy to do that. But thanks so much for listening.